Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome back Marcus Matawhero Lloyd. You may remember Marcus from an episode last year where he talked us through his experiences at Standing Rock, as well as parts of his journey rebuilding an ancestral power site on the east coast of New Zealand's North Island. Since we last spoke, Marcus has kept adventuring, and he joins us today to discuss his recent hikoi, which is a Maori term meaning something in between an intentional or, protest walk and ritual journey to affirm sacred values. Very good stuff. Oh, and some of the pre-chat has been left in rather than opening the show clean for reasons that will soon become obvious. All right. Let's go to the tape.
Are you able to see this video?
No, I've got the video below. Do you want to show the... Always show. All right, here we go. Oh, there you are. Hello.
I just want to show you...
shit! Yeah, look at that.
This is really interesting. So this fantail that's just flown inside.
Yep.
There's a lot of story behind our fantails.
Go on.
Piwai waka, we call them. And where I live now, which is our family marae and the lands of my ancestors, when the fantail comes into our meetings, it's always a great sign that our ancestors are present with us.
Wow, that's very well timed. They're welcome.
That's pretty good timing.
Yeah. Well, that's something, I was talking to Kiwi Charles, which is what we call him amongst the premium members, in advance of our discussion. And I'm very interested to hear about your river adventures. But there's also some things about the marae and so on that I figure this would be a really good opportunity to talk about and introduce the people listening to the show. The overwhelming majority of them, literally 98% of them, are not in New Zealand. So there's some really cool stuff I think that they would learn from that chat. But if we're good to go on it, where would you like to start? I was thinking, if we want to talk about, should we talk about your river adventure? Or should we open by talking about Whanganui and the new changed status of river as person? Because I think that's very, very interesting. So if we start with that and then talk about is Whanganui the thin end of the wedge? Is Waikato next? Is this the first river that gets its person status back?
Yep, it is, and it's not the last.
Excellent. So, tell us about what happened there, because this is something that's near and dear to a lot of the listeners' hearts.
Sure. Do you need the video?
No, we'll switch the video off now. It was good to see the fantail.
You still hear me, though?
Hear you loud and clear, and also still hear the bird. It's a pleasant background.
All right. Okay, how much time do we have, first of all?
I've got about an hour.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, the Whanganui River, receiving the legal recognition of personhood, is not the first natural thing that's received legal recognition. The Urewera forests of the Tuhoi tribe has also received a similar designation, along with the Urewera forest is a actual marae, and the marae is the sort of cultural ancestor building, and that has also received a similar designation as an individual. One of the most sustainable buildings to be built in New Zealand. It's also not only just symbolically an ancestor, but literally recognised as an ancestral being.
There was an excellent documentary about that process that I think I shared last time you were on the show, but I'll reshare it again so people can follow along that story.
So the Whanganui River, of course, setting a stronger precedent now to be able to put roles of guardianship protection, the interests of the river itself ahead of the interests of corporations and individuals. The execution is going to be interesting and is at this stage got a sort of a statutory body of 6 people which represent the interests of the individual, which is the Whanganui River. And that's made up of part of the government have representatives there, but also the iwi, or the indigenous folk, and members of the community. I think the intentional aim is, of course, to assess the mind and will of the river and to represent the mind and will of the river's interests, first and foremost, which is fantastic. It's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think people, when you consider what the legal status of personhood means, for instance, if I try to poison you, Marcus, I will go to prison. Same thing if I try to fill you with garbage, I will be arrested. And so that's the length of the person that is the Whanganui. That's not blocking off a little corner of it which is fine because fish breed there or what have you. It's, I can't poison you, I can't put garbage in you, and I can't just harvest you because you're a person. And that's a really big legal difference, isn't it?
That's an absolutely big difference. So the protection of rights, the rights that humans have. Personally, I think that there's another level in which our significant rivers and mountains and Mother Earth as a whole can attain to, which is uber human rights. It's greater than human rights, and we're on the right step towards that. I think more significant, as I've come to understand, is understanding the mind and will of the river. When we recognize it as a living being, an entity, an intelligence of sorts that has its own capacity for consciousness, awareness, and thought, now that takes it to a new perspective. And as I've done walked across the North Island, I've come to understand a lot deeper what it means to connect to the mind of the land, to the mind of the river, and to begin a process of dialogue and communication with it. It takes learning new languages, new perspectives, a lot more.
So tell us about that walk. I mean, was this something you just kind of spontaneously thought you might want to do one day, or was it almost like a research pilgrimage to kind of experience how we might have these engagements moving forward? Talk us through where the idea came from and where you went and so on.
Sure. So the hikoi, or the walk, or Māori, hikoi is Māori for a long journey. So the hikoi was 4 months and 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers across the North Island. It wasn't planned. It wasn't anticipated, not consciously at least, but I think there was some movement in the spirit preparing the way. The first sort of seeds of the idea of walking came as I began to look at precedents of hikoi within our history. And the last strongest significant hikoi in recent history was Dame Whenekupa, and she walked from the top of the North Island to Wellington for land rights. And that was back in the 70s when she did that. And that sort of established a modern sort of renewal of the idea of hikoi. But since then, I never considered it as a personal sort of pilgrimage of my own until last year. And I think the visit to Standing Rock to stand and support our Native American relatives to protect the waters and against the pipeline essentially was the catalyst that I've carried through. So I couldn't rest when I came home. I couldn't go back to business as usual. And even though I tried to, and I think from the last podcast was sharing of the experiences, a lot happened after that, which I really wasn't anticipating. So the contract that I was working on as a 3-year contract came to a conclusion. I'd begun to feel a strong shift away from the desire to secure more contracts, and I was wondering why and what am I meant to do about that. All of the sort of barriers or obstacles or day-to-day activities that were holding me began to fall away, freeing my space and my time. And then there was an occasion where I received sort of an inner prompting which said that I needed to consider the idea of renewing ceremonies, traditional ceremonies. And so being committed to that process, the first ceremony that I received was, I'm rebuilding a past site. It's a traditional past site that my ancestors used to live in. The last time they lived in there was 8 generations ago. And I've been 3 years in the process of rebuilding that. And so the guidance that I received said to go into the past site, to dig a hole that you could sit in, heat up rocks, put the rocks in the hole, sit in the hole, put what we call kawa leaves, which is a healing plant, all around you to cover the hole, and then pour water in it and fast for 3 days. So I was quite excited with the prospect that this was a new ceremony or an old ceremony being renewed. And in the process of doing it, I remember thinking, great, this is the ceremony. And then I felt this prompting saying, no, this isn't the ceremony. This is the preparation for the ceremony. So I was like, well, if this is a 3-day preparation, I'm curious as what the actual ceremony will be. And it was about 6 months later that I felt extremely strong promptings that I needed to start walking. I needed to walk the land. And I'm not much of a hiker, and I'm not much of I like traveling, but not on foot. And it wasn't until I began walking that I realized that this walk will be the ceremony, and that from the moment I begin to the moment I end, I'll be learning, receiving, and experiencing. And so it was sort of a new perspective to what I was doing. So I accepted the counsel to begin the walk. Had no clue. I got myself a backpack, a sleeping bag, and a couple of days worth of supplies, and then just started walking. Not really sure where I would go, but like a river, let it flow where it'll go naturally. I had anticipated walking the main highway from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South, but again, the inner counsel, the inner guidance said, well, rivers don't go in that manner. They twist and they turn, and this ceremony, this hikoi, is going to be similar. So you'll receive directions at certain points as to where and how you should travel and what you should visit. So that was quite an introduction to this new experience.
And how do the subsequent directions show up? Is it dream experiences? Do you get a kind of intuitive or non-verbal interaction with place when you are at a point where the Hikoi River is going to bend? So talk us through that bit. I mean, this is a very mystically inclined audience, so they're here for those kind of discussions. Great.
So I have a lot of friends. I have family who are what we call matakite. Matakite is the Māori word for seer and a healer. And so when I felt that things were not working the way I should because I needed to do something, when I recognized that I needed to walk, accepted it, I sought, first of all, counsel from my matakite, and she pretty much said that, right, when at the parting of the two ways and when the snow melts, then you begin your journey. And so the last of the big snowfalls for last year, as soon as that finished, I knew right away that I'd need to walk. As I was journeying, there's an internal prompting, first of all. So listening to the voices of what I call Io Matua, the creator, the Atua, that's the the servants of Io Matua, the spirits, the deities of our past, listening to the ancestors, my tipuna, listening to the inner promptings as well of my own conscience and spirit. We're all a part of this journey, and I was trying to recognize who's saying what. So I knew the first step that I needed to go to was an old past site, an old village, which was inhabited by one of the great ancestors in 1500 AD, and he was known as the chief who brought peace to the eastern seaboard of the North Island. His name was Ruapani, and that was 20 kilometers away. So I knew that first step was to go there, and when I get there, I'd get the next step. So I stayed 2 nights there, and in the process of those 2 nights, then came the prompting is an awareness. Not only it's greater than a word, it's greater than voice. It's a feeling of assurance that's accompanied by instruction, and I've just learned to translate that into more direction.
Learn by doing. Yeah, that's good.
Learn by doing, learn by experience, and listening all the way. So what I did learn is that when I began the walk, that I entered into the ceremony, so the ceremonial mind was constant with me for 4 months. The awareness that comes with being in a ceremonial mind meant that I had to attune myself. The attuning got stronger and stronger, which also meant that my capacity to receive awareness got stronger, and the means and methods by which I would receive messages became more myriad in the application of it. So I was able to then feel prompting, hear word, see images, and be immersed in the energy as well of different circumstances and or places, depending, and then recognizing the differences in that sort of energy and frequency, which is a fantastic and humbling experience. So that sort of led me to say, right, I now need to walk. Of course, I felt that since I was going to walk, I might as well get me a sign, because put the walk to some good use, promote and prompt something that's of significance to me. And water, of course, became the key focal point for my walk. Every river that I walked across, every stream that I encountered, every lake and water body, including the ocean, became a part of that ceremony, where I sought to pray at the waters, to communicate and to listen. And this is where the Whanganui River became significant, because by the time I reached there, which is at around 1,200 kilometers, and then I walked the length of the Whanganui River, my relationship and my reception was very deep and meaningful. The Whanganui River is my mother's river.
Oh, cool.
My mother. So I knew that it was going to be a wonderful significance to walk there.
So where did you go? I want to let me go from the beginning bit. I mean, did you intuit or sense that, given that you are reconstructing a pa, that a nearby prominent pa is a good starting place, or is there something about koiwi or ancestral burdens and so on that's a really good, which it is, but like is a really good sort of opening step for a hikoi? Was that the intention, or did you get that from the seer? Because that's very good magic, Marcus. I think that's that's something that's been a part of me since I began the rebuild of my pa site on our family land here, and the learning that I've received in the process of rebuilding that pa site and connecting with the ancestors, listening to their voices, being guided as to how and what to build and how to build it. And those came sporadically over quiet moments, or while I'm sitting waiting to know how to put the structure together and then receiving it. But I did get the strongest promptings that the walk would be, actually there was 3 purposes. The first was for water. The second was to defend the sacred, in particular sacred places. And the third was for the strengthening of the hearts of those who are going through challenging times and difficulties.
So it's called the Strong Heart Hikoi for water. The sacred places, I knew that I needed to go and visit because I firmly believe that there are significant numbers of portals that are beginning to open again across the land, that many of those sacred portals we need to now go to and we need to connect with, and that this hikoi would introduce me to a number of those portals. I didn't know where a lot of them were, so I knew that if I go to the first place, then I would be guided as to where I should go to the next place, which is exactly what happened. So I didn't.
Was it at that next place that you realized? I mean, when did you realize? This is a funny way of describing it. That this is going to work. That
first step.
Yeah.
The first when I took the very first step outside of my gate, right from that moment, I knew that this was my path. This is what I was meant to do, and that I would be guided for the entire journey. But it was only a step ahead as opposed to a lot of forethought ahead of time. I had no anticipation of where I was going to be in a week's time or in a month's time, but there was no concern about that. One of the benefits of walking in New Zealand is it's a very safe place. It's also very convenient. Being I know a lot of people, and so there was a little bit of ease in recognizing that, okay, I'm not going to be in too difficult circumstance.
Not going to be attacked by brigands or, get caught in well, you can get caught in a snowstorm, but not like North Alaska or something.
Exactly. But it was internally, I did really want to be guided to the right places so that I could pray, so that I could offer up. And I'm no expert in ceremonial performance or in prayer, but I just felt that the walk itself would teach me. And if nothing I can offer a footstep, then let it be. I came to learn that in the act of walking in that ceremonial mind, that each step was a prayer, that each step resonated deep into Papatūānuku, Mother Earth. And I think it was at the 500, 600 kilometer mark, I was walking and I specifically felt and heard Papatūānuku, Mother Earth, say that when you step on me, your footsteps resonate deep into me. And I recognize your footsteps now because you have committed your focus and your awareness. And it shocked me when I received that. It was like, wow, I never thought of it like that. If there's 7 billion people, 14 billion pairs of feet, and our mother is saying that she recognizes my feet because of the commitment I've made, and that my footsteps resonate deep. I don't even have to vocalize that with words, but the intention of my desires will go deep. It was a very humbling moment when that happened, and very clear, and I was very aware of that communication.
That's astonishing. Was it about that part that you, as you said, you kind of got better at the interactivity and communication over the course of it? Tell us about one of the sort of earlier experiences with a place that you maybe thought, maybe this is a portal, maybe this isn't. Some of those kind of, okay, well, I'm going to try this. I feel something. I'm going to do this and see what happens. Tell us about some of the kind of connection points, I guess, along the hikoi.
Yeah, so the first past site that I visited, which is only around 20 kilometers away from us, so being there, of course, I've got an emotional attachment to it, but I've also got a spiritual attachment to it. It was subtle, and then when I left there, I began to walk along the east coast of the North Island, beside the ocean, and as I travelled, I ended up at another past site that I didn't know about until I got there, and then I realized this is a past site. And what I do feel is some of that history began to show itself in my feelings and in my mind. Now, still very subtly, in essence, you get taken back into the experiences and the energy of what last happened there, and in multiple layers. And so there was some anxiety and anxiousness of the last experiences that had occurred at that place, and I began to feel some of that. I learned over the journey that the longer I could stay there and tap into the deeper layers of that history, the different energy I could feel. So I could recognize this is the 1800s surface energy that occurred when there was a lot of fighting, and this is the deeper layers when they were establishing family relationships. And but one of the more pronounced moments that when I began to realize I wasn't alone, I was walking. So I think I'm 3-4 days into the walk now, and maybe about 250 kilometers. I'm walking along, minding my own business, quite really. And then I walk around the corner, and I feel that to my right side, up on a hill, there's an old pass site. And I could feel the presence of a number of ancestors that were following my journey. And that was the first sort of moment I realized that, okay, this is not an internal, private experience, that there are other beings that are now aware. I became conscious that I wanted to be respectful of those ancestors when I walked through their lands. And I wasn't sure the protocols. So I made sure my intentions reflected my desire to respect their whenua, we call it, their lands. So as I walked this corner, I could feel on the top of this hill where this old pass site was, the presence of these ancestors. And then to my left, off the side of the road, this is when I began to see in my mind that there was a warrior who had been following me. And he was now, well, I was at the boundary between two tribes. And this warrior was passing me off to the warrior from the other tribe, because the first warrior couldn't go any further because it was no longer his area. And I remember stopping on the side of the road and just looking to that left and feeling that presence and recognizing that, oh, I'm not alone, that there are guardians and guides that are helping me through this process, that I need to remember them, that I need to respect and acknowledge their presence. And from that point on, for the entire 4 months, I've recognized the presence, and I was never alone, never alone. There are multiple, but I also understood the rules of engagement, the handing over of the different boundaries where the new guide would take over. I also recognized, though, that there are different types of guides. So there was the warriors who were physically there in the spirit form to defend, but there are also Kaitiaki guardians of different energies, and taniwha. And a taniwha is sort of a, it's not a sea monster, it's not a river monster, but that's how some describe taniwha. It's more of a true guardian of the lands, the rivers, the mountains. And I began to connect with the taniwha a lot more deeply. And that would become more pronounced as I walked the Waikato River, which was 435 kilometers long. So I spent 2 weeks walking that river and getting a very deep relationship with the river and with the taniwha along the river.
Yeah, even someone as not good at this as me can recognize the taniwha. I could, driving along Waikato, and actually on the west coast of the South Island in the waves as well. That was an interesting experience. But you mentioned the protective or defensive capacities of the warrior spirits that were with you. Were they needed at any point? We're talking about, I mean, fair enough, a taniwha is a challenging, but it's challenging to interact with in a way an ancestor isn't, right? But were there any kind of horror movie spooky bits that required the use of or the assistance of the warrior spirits? Or because obviously you're doing something that is mostly in the spirit world and partly in the physical, and not everything in the spirit world is friendly. So were there any kind of spooky bits along the hikoi?
There was, so I'll share this experience. So walking the Waikato River again, and I am 3 days walking through the bush. I think I'm on the second day of the 3-day bush part of it before I came to any civilization. I was 40 kilometers into the day. The evening was coming on pretty quickly. I was walking through a pine forest, which was I was climbing up a hill, on a bluff beside the river through a pine forest. And it was quite a large sort of bluff to climb. It took maybe 2 hours. The incline was pretty steep. It began to get dark. I had no light on at that time, and I remember it was still quite hot. The weather was quite warm. The evening was warm, and I was sweating. And so, carrying my backpack, climbing the hill, I was sweating. But it began to get dark, and I was looking forward to settling down, camping up for the night. I began to notice that along the path, individual pine trees had fallen across the pathway, and we're talking 10-year growth pine trees, and not in clumps or groups, but singular pine trees had fallen down in random places. The Department of Conservation had, of course, gone through to cut them so that the pathway was clear. But it was my first point of notice, thinking looks unusual. And by that stage, I'd recognized and become aware that I had to be aware of the environment and of small changes, because it could also mean something else. So I thought, okay, I'll notice that. So I carried on walking. It's still quite hot. I'm still climbing the hill. I turned another corner, and then instantly it felt like I was walking through air conditioning in a shop. When you walk through the doors of a shop and you can feel the push of air conditioning and just a shift in temperature. And so walking through this invisible vacuum of air, I felt instantly the sweat stopped on my forehead, and I began to feel the chills. So to me, the chills is essentially the awareness of my energy, my chakra, to other energy around me. And so I recognize, okay, I need to be mindful and conscious something in this area has a different energy. So I carried on walking, and then the energy got more and more intense. And then I saw off to my right, there was an energetic being, and it wasn't happy. And it started to move towards me, and I could feel the pressure of its presence getting stronger. I acknowledged it, because by this stage I had known that I need to acknowledge the taniwha. Whenever I felt it, if there was any inkling of feeling, acknowledge taniwha. But I also received an image in my mind at that instant, and the image that came to me was of a Kaitiaki where I live, which we call Takumi, which is half lizard, half man. And when that image came into my mind, I was struck. I was thinking, now why would this image come to me now? In the entire journey, I had not once thought of Takumi, and yet here I am in this moment, and the image of Takumi has come to me. And then I realized, right, I'm feeling this presence, so there's taniwha here. So I immediately acknowledged the taniwha, and then I received and felt this intense energy, and it was not a happy energy. It was coming towards me, and it wasn't going to stop. And so the first time on my journey, I called to my guides and asked them if they would come a little closer and surround me. I'm not really afraid of a lot of the I've encountered a lot of energy beings over time, and I'm not really that worried. This was one of the rare occasions where I felt it'd be nice to have my guides just a little closer to me right now. So they came around me, and the taniwha stopped, and then I acknowledged it, and just pretty much says, I honor and acknowledge you. I recognize you, that this is your domain and that I'm walking through it. I'm asking for your permission. I'm on a hikoi, on a journey. I'm actually wanting to recognize sacred places, the sanctity of water. And I've been walking the Waikato for 2 weeks. When I began to talk like that, I felt the presence start to ease off. And then I realized that I know that the actions of humans have changed the face of this river, which has caused you to be put out of your place. And I apologize for that. I apologize for all those who have come and have treated you in such a manner. And I felt sort of prompted just to let it know that there will be many now who will come, which will begin to recognize and to honor your place as the true guardians and kaitiaki of this river. I'm one, and there are many more that will come. So I just continued walking and sharing that discussion. It was 3 kilometers later, because there was a sign which said I had 7 kilometers to go to my journey, and when I started that experience, it was 9 kilometers. There's another sign. So I knew that for 3 kilometers, I felt that presence with me. And by this stage, it had gotten dark, so I was walking through the middle of the forest, the pine forest, in the dark, without my light, after 40 kilometers of a long walk along the bluff of the Waikato, which was maybe 300 feet. And then I crossed the river, turned a corner, and as strong as the first vacuum of air that I walked through the second and came out and instantly began sweating again. It was that noticeable, instant drops of sweat. And then I turned, paid my respect, acknowledged and recognized the energy and the power of this Kaitiaki guardian, and thanked it. And then I carried on. 3 kilometers later, I camped up for the night, right next to the largest dam on the Waikato River, which I didn't know where it was in proportion to where I'd had that experience. Then I recognized and realized that that dam had been put in there, had put the taniwha out of its place, and that's why it was upset. And so few people acknowledge the taniwha these days. So that was probably one of the more pronounced and profound experiences there, where there were multiple beings that were felt by me.
Did you ever, it's fascinating, amazing story. Did you ever get to the bottom of why Takumi showed up? Like why that was your first image?
Yeah. I asked specifically, why Takumi? The answer I received was, well, because in order for me to understand the energy and entity that I'm talking to, it needed to use the data bank of what I already had stored in me.
So it's a quasi reptilian taniwha that has been displaced by the dam.
Well, it was an equivalent being. So I think that taniwha looked inside and says, right, this is the closest to help you recognize what I am like. So I'm going to bring this out because I already have an awareness of Takumi. I also have a respect for Takumi, and I know how to approach and show deference to the energy. So I believe the taniwha essentially says, right, well, that's the understanding you have of Takumi. I want you to treat me the same way that you treat Takumi. So I'm going to bring that to your mind so that you can cue in and be aware. I don't think that taniwha looked like Takumi.
Gotcha.
I didn't ask for it to reveal itself in that form. Maybe I'll go back and ask.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're not alone in the woods in the middle of the night asking a taniwha to show its true form, which would be scary, exactly. Scary in the middle of the day. Something comes to mind. Is there a process or a way, now that you've kind of, as part of the hikoi, you've worked out that you have a displaced taniwha here who is understandably upset. Can you talk to, local iwi and say, this is my experience? Are there things we can do to correct this? Do you know what I mean? Is that a next step?
Absolutely. Well, not just me. I had friends who, as I began the journey along the Waikato River, essentially they gave me some guidance. They said, look, this is important. We can't describe the taniwha because they will manifest to each individual as they choose. So we may all see a different perspective of the taniwha, but acknowledge them. If you feel any inkling or prompting, acknowledge them, because that's the first step, acknowledging the taniwha. I encountered 4 taniwha along the journey. That one I've just shared was probably the most significant and pronounced. And so what I do realize, though, that is there is still a conversation and a relationship that needs to be strengthened between humans and the kaitiaki, and understanding understanding the science of that relationship helps so we know how to engage. If I can quickly share another encounter that I
take
had.
all the time you need. I rapt attention. Go ahead, Marcus.
There's a Sanctuary Mountain. So Sanctuary Mountain is in the Waikato area. That's in the Hamilton area. It's a mountain which has been fenced off from predators. So the entire mountain has a predator-proof fence which surrounds the entire place. It's called Mangatautare in Māori, and it's right in the heart of Tainui and Ngāti Raukawa peoples. It's also beside the Waikato River. So this mountain, being sacred in its purpose and history, has been a project to maintain and protect its native flora and to restore native bird life to it. It's a beautiful place, and I encourage anyone who gets a chance to go to Sanctuary Mountain. So I went and visited there with a friend. Interesting that the friend was a Waikato farmer who heard about my walk for water. His wife then messaged me and invited me to visit with them because they had felt a lot of pressure, particularly the farming industry as a whole, on the impact of farming on our waterways and the pollution that had come from it. And they decided to confront or to engage that conversation directly. I came to find out that this particular farm had won environmental awards as the most sustainable dairy farm in the country. And actually, I have a great friendship with them now, Judge Valley Dairies, and having a look at their commitment to making sure that their industry cleans up its act. And so I went and visited and stayed with them. They retired 15% of their farm for native replanting. They've created, they have the cleanest stream through a farm I'd ever seen, so clean that I would be comfortable drinking from it. And by this stage, I had crossed maybe 2,000 streams and rivers on my journey. So I think I was a good judge of the quality by that point. Now, he took me to the Sanctuary Mountain. He was one of the original workers that helped to establish it and has a very strong commitment to it, but had since been sort of off the board. And as we walked through the mountain, we began to talk about Kaitiaki and Guardian. And he did mention there were challenges that had been happening within the board, within the community around the mountain, around who has a right to protect the mountain, who has a right of access, who controls, is it iwi, and there are a number of different tribes that were jostling over who sort of has more rights than another. Then there was the trust itself with the broad, directorship from multi-international individuals to locals. Then there was the local council. So there's so many parties all vying for some aspect of say and control over the mountain. And as he shared this with me and we began to walk through the mountain, I had the very distinct impression to ask, where are the Kaitiaki here on the mountain, and where are the representations or the carvings that honour them? And he said, well, there are no carvings, and I don't know who or what are the guardians of this mountain. And I says, well, that's interesting. Have any of the local iwi carved or recognised the Kaitiaki of Mangatautare? And he says, well, not that he knew of. And as I walked through it, there were no references to any of the Kaitiaki that were there. Right about that point, once again, I began to feel the presence of the Kaitiaki that were in that forest. And it was an opportunity to share with him, and he's European descendant. So, and he, by his own confession, not a very spiritual person and not used to any sort of metaphysical experience. But at this moment, he became very keenly a part of an experience. So I felt there was some strong Kaitiaki of this mountain, but that they, again, hadn't been consulted in the development and in the process of the governance of this mountain. They recognized the respected the work that had been gone in to protect and to keep it safe. They recognized the individuals who had championed the protection of the mountain, and they recognized my friend who was with me as one of the original workers. And so I felt to tell my friend that the forest itself remembers you. It knows that you came here and worked tirelessly, and it doesn't forget the people that have given themselves to its benefit. And so I'd like you to know, I guess, that the forest acknowledges you. It also acknowledges the founders. And now it's saying, where are they? Because they're not here anymore. And politically, that's right. The original founders were removed off the trust. And then a number of other parties had come into play to try and take over governorship. So it then occurred to me as well that we have a number of tribes that are jostling for control over this mountain. And I remember saying to my friend, has anyone asked the mountain what it wants? Or have we all assumed on its behalf? Has anyone actually come in here, spoken to it, and let it say how it wishes to be governed? The tribes that have claimed control or some level of guardianship, to the mountain, they're a blip in its history. To us, we may feel that being tangata whenua, people of the land, being here for 3,000-5,000 years, that we have some sort of rights. To the mountain, 1,000 years is nothing, and it knows and it has seen more beyond that time than what we currently think. So our rights may not be as sound perpetually as we think they are. So I did ask, have anyone in the tribe asked the mountain what it wants for itself? Now that was an important lesson for me, because that applies to the rivers, that applies to the forests, that applies to our relationship with Papatūānuku. And then I thought, well, how do you ask? And I says, that's the challenge. That's going to be the big challenge. People assuming they know instead of actually having a discussion with the mountain. And it does require a new form of language or receiving and understanding. And I guess as I continued my journey, a lot of the manifestations, the river itself spoke strongly. A couple of the forests that I stayed in were very vocal in their sharing of their discussions with me too. So, yeah, so that was a really, that was a moment that shifted within me a lot about respect for the land that we have.
Do you know if this local farmer friend of yours is going to follow up with local tribes? It sort of comes back to the displaced Taniwha situation. You've done something that, as you say, hasn't been done very often in the last couple of 100 years, which means you have new insight that obviously, which is why you're on the show, deserves to be shared and should be shared. But there's nevertheless, I appreciate there might be some sensitivity wading into, you know, especially if there's contention of ownership or guardianship or custodianship between several different tribes, and you're from another one, to come in and be like, I have something to say. I mean, how would you like that to work, Marcus?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question too. What I do know is that the mountain itself can extend its influence beyond its own presence, that it can then engage with other beings and bring them to the mountain and people of influence. It needs reception. It needs people whose ears are open to listen. But I realized that I was brought there as a part of this journey so that I could share that experience, so that others would begin to think in different ways about how they have this relationship. And if it prompts them to then actually go up to the mountain and just sit there and say, well, okay, I better start asking directly now, then I hope that's a positive outcome. Now, the reality of what I used to share my journey was social media. And in small snippets, I was able to share these experiences. And I'm only sharing what I have experienced personally, what I felt. And I make no apologies for what I felt and that I need to share, because it was far deeper than myself. I think ignorance is a great tool of preparation, because I didn't know how I didn't know better. So I can only say what I received. I don't have a judgment about it. I didn't have a sort of a pre-planned agenda. It's just saying, this is what I got. You take from it what you will, but I'm just going to share with you what I received. And I would guarantee if you did the same, you would receive and you would know too. Now, the thing that I have recognized is that on my journey of all the different tribes, that my genealogy ties me to 7 of them, including that place. So at a long stretch, I can still say that my genealogy connects me to this place, which means that I do have a place to share my voice in the marketplace of the discussion and let everyone think about it. I received another insight, if I can share this one as well, about the Waikato and about the role of kaitiaki or guardianship as it relates to the traditional entities and as it relates to us as human beings. So do we have time for that one?
Yeah, all the time you want.
All right. So once again, I'm walking through Tainui is the name of the iwi, the tribe, and I didn't know any genealogical connection, so I was very conscious of being respectful to the people as I walked through their land. There's the sacred mountain, Taupiri, which has the Ariki, the great chiefs of Tainui, including the kings and the queens of Māoridom. And I knew I was going to be walking through there, so I had to go and pay my respects. And as I got to that particular place, I had a koha, which is a gift, a greenstone that I placed at the mountain is a cemetery, essentially. So I placed it there. I spent 50 minutes sharing internally my journey, what my purpose was, and seeking their permission as I was to carry on through their lands, that I might be safe and protected and guided, particularly guided to the right places. And so feeling after 15 minutes that I was able to do that, then I left the gate. I walked 2 minutes. I received a message on my phone from someone who I didn't know, who said, if you happen to be in Taupiri, go to 76 Taupiri or Great South Road. There's a person there who would love to meet you. And I was like, oh, that's convenient. I've just finished talking with the kings and the Ariki, and now I get this message. And that address was about 2 minutes down the road. So 2 minutes later, I'm knocking at this door, and this beautiful lady comes to the door. Her name was Rangi Mahuta, and she lives on the river. And she is probably one of the great champions of the river and of environmental improvements for the Tainui tribe in the Waikato region. And she said, I've been waiting for you. And I was like, wow, that's great. Do you know who I am? And she goes, well, I've heard about your journey and you're walking along the river, and I wanted to meet you. And so we spent about half an hour together, and she got to know me and I got to know her. And in some respects, I think maybe it was also a feeling me out to see what I'm doing. Why am I walking this river? And quickly, though, we became very good friends. And she took me to the river, and she looked out over it as it passed by her. And she says, my entire family and generations have lived here with the river. And we talked about taniwha. And then she asked me, she said, what do you believe or think about kaitiaki, the word? And I says, well, kaitiaki literally translated as guardian. And she said, what do you think about the policies of inclusion of kaitiaki in iwi politics and in council politics? I said, I don't understand really what the modern context of kaitiaki is, and I don't know if the definition we give it, which means that we are the kaitiaki of the river, is valid. And she said, that's a good point. She said, are we the kaitiaki or are the taniwha the kaitiaki? And immediately I was like, well, I believe the taniwha are the kaitiaki, not us. She said, if we assume the role of kaitiaki, are we then displacing the taniwha from their role and assuming that we are greater than them, that we have more say over this than they do? And I says, I agree. I don't believe that we have a place to remove the true kaitiaki of the river. And then she told me about the history of the Waikato, that the Waikato has had two journeys. Its oldest journey, where its original path flowed out to Thames. And then 26,000 years ago, Lake Taupo blew up, a volcanic eruption, and that changed the path of the Waikato to its current path, which comes out at Port Waikato beneath Auckland. And she said there have been kaitiaki along that river for thousands, 20,000 years, who have regulated, who have cared for, who have looked after this river. Long before we came, the kaitiaki were doing their job. And when we come along, and now we presume that we are the ones who should be the kaitiaki, what does that do to the taniwha? And immediately I recognized what she was saying because of what I had felt. And so I think there's a lot of thought that we need to consider about that principle. So I says, well, is it our job then to care for the taniwha so that they can continue to do their job, which is to protect the health of the river? And she said, now that's probably more what we should be focusing on, as opposed to saying that it's my place to heal the river. Tell you, the river, it can heal itself. The river has more capacity and awareness of its own health than we recognize. And so those are some of the deeper experiences which are now sort of guiding how I think, and the people I talk with too.
So the discussion is happening, positive discussions about kaitiaki status and taniwha, and Sanctuary Mountain's a good example, and this story you just shared is another one. Those discussions are happening and growing, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think with more voices, with different perspectives, the more we can include that in our deliberations around how we accept our role as a part of, not as the only guardian of the rivers.
And
it was interesting.
There you go.
Oh, sorry. It was interesting that I spent half an hour with Rangi, and then when I left her, I was walking down the road about another 5 minutes, and then as I was walking beside the river, I felt this burst of wind come up from the river. And I recognized, okay, so I'm walking, there's no disturbance to the environment in an instant, there's this burst of wind. Be mindful. So, okay, I'm mindful. Next thing, a storm cloud comes over and it pours down with rain on a day that was fine. And I was like, okay, well, there's another sign here. Be mindful. So the rain was so incessant that I ducked into the trees off the side of the road and hid underneath the foliage. And while I was there waiting for the rain to pass, one leaf flew out from behind me and landed in front of me. And in Māori, whenever there's a process of greeting, it's called a wero. It's the warriors will come forward to meet the visiting party, then they will place and lay down a wreath or a leaf as a symbol of peace. If we pick that leaf up, then we've come in peace, and then the warriors will welcome us. If we're not there with good intentions, then we won't pick it up, and then we know we're going to get it on. So right at that moment, I thought, the wind has just blown from the river. A rainstorm has stopped me in my path. I'm now standing under this tree, and this leaf, one leaf, has come and laid in front of me. I better pick that thing up. So very cautiously, I bent down, picked it up, and then the rain stopped. And then I kept it in my pocket. Then I stepped back on the road and carried on walking. At that point, I also says, right, acknowledge taniwha, because you just never know. So I thought, yes, I acknowledge you, taniwha. And then I was going to turn a corner to go left or right. I was going to stay left, and I felt prompted to go right. I went right. There was a vehicle waiting there. A young lady popped her head out of the car window and says, oh, there you are. I saw you walking, and then I turned around to see if you wanted to get a ride, and you disappeared. So I thought I'd wait over here because you just might show again. And here you are. And she said, would you like to come for lunch? And, of course, when you're walking on the road, you always accept invitations for food. So I was like, yeah, I'd love to come for lunch. And she said, great. I'm at the Waikato Tainui College of Research and Development, which is just a little up the road here. Come on up and ask for my name, and I'll give you some lunch. So I did. And I met with her, and I asked her what she did, and she says, well, my research is involved with eels on the Waikato River. And I was like, well, that's amazing. And she says, what would be great is that we've got a number of master's students coming this weekend, and all of their thesis work is on the Waikato River. It's restoration, it's protection, it's health, the taniwha, the entire gamut of experience to do with the river. And I thought, you can't plan this sort of thing. I had no intention or expectation of this happening. And in the space of the time that I prayed at Taupiri Mountain, which is where the kings are, I met Rangipoa Mahuta. We talked about taniwha. And now I am being invited to meet with the foremost Indigenous experts on this river. And I realized that taniwha was guiding each of those encounters. It was a very humbling experience, and again, a very deep love for the Waikato River that I have.
It's, I mean, I could listen to this all day. It was a rather long walk, Marcus. Is there anything else? Because I want to wind up with a couple of questions about what you brought back with you once you got back to Gisborne in terms of maybe a changed understanding of the PAR project and so on. But is there anything left on the hikoi part of the story that you'd like to share with the audience before we do that bit?
Sure. I felt very strongly prompted at the beginning to take a white quartz rock, which comes out of our sacred river where I live. And so it's a large one, about the size of my fist. And I carried it across my chest in a woven sort of front pack, small little pouch. And I carried it more for sentimental reasons in the beginning. And then as I journeyed, that quartz I placed into every river, stream, and lake in the ocean along my journey. My thoughts about it began to grow as I understood the principle of what it was. So initially my thinking was that, okay, this quartz perhaps in some deep way will become a recorder of my feelings because it's close to my heart. All the feelings that I have and experiences will be embedded in the quartz somehow, and that it will be a witness to this hikoi. That it would also, because it was being placed in every river, be a witness to the rivers and to the quality and the health of the rivers. And as I began to put it in there, I also realized that it was talking with the rivers. It was also connecting the journey together. And day and night, I carried that white quartz with me. And because I work in the IT industry, I began to think of these sort of technical aspects to this journey and think, well, we use quartz in computers and in watches to keep time. As I understand it, quartz vibrates at a very high frequency, 37 or 36,000 hertz or something like this, which when you pass an electrical current through it, you can reduce it down to the perfect 1 second interval, which is why it's a great timekeeper. And I also realized that in a lot of processes, quartz timekeeping and gold processes are good partners that work together. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if I'm bioelectrical, then maybe I'm passing a current through this piece of quartz across my chest, which is activating it as a device of some sort that will record my journey and the discussions with everything that I've had. And then I went to Karangahaki Gorge, which is by Thames, which has, in the gorge, has a gold mining operation, which we went to try and very vocally stop. And there's also a quartz mountain next to it. And so once again, both of those two, quartz and gold being together, form a sort of processor. It's like the mountain itself was a processor for the North Island, and the rivers were the network. As I consider the flow of light through fiber optics, is able to channel information from one place to another, that our waterways work in a similar vein, that are connected to each other, that they talk to each other, that they're all a part of one great whole system. And that unified system is the being. And that being, we understand in Māori as Te Ika a Maui, which is the fish of Maui, who Maui fished up out of the waters, which we call the North Island, which is in the shape of a manta ray. And so I learned very quickly that I was walking along the body of Te Ika a Maui, and that it was a living entity with arteries and with a mind and with intelligence and thought, and that I was a small being engaged in that relationship. Then I also felt the guidance and promptings which said, okay, you're going to walk the arteries of Te Ika a Maui. You're going to walk up into the heart, and in the heart, you're going to pray and have your ceremony. And there's a lot more to that part of it as well, but quite simply, it sort of just brought everything together for me with what I do at a professional level, with a networking and IT bend, but also sort of harmonized a lot of my thinking around the science of our spiritual traditions, which is probably where I'm being directed and guided to now, is to share that understanding, provide opportunities for more discussions. Hopefully people will be motivated and encouraged to think about their water and the importance of our relationship to that primal source of life, the first waters which we were born from, and also not be so intimidated or afraid about engaging with the various sort of entities, beings, but also respecting the protocols. And those things probably have been the greatest lesson that I've received, learning to communicate with the atua, the deities of the wind and the forests and the ocean, in a whole new way that I don't think I could have planned on if I hadn't gone for a walk.
Well, it's a lovely story. And what are you doing at the Crystal now, other than teasing your kids that you just made a taonga that they have to take care of for generations?
It's very active. So it's still doing its job, and it's still being taken to waterways. We're still using it as a means of communication and recording. We're praying with it. The work has only just started to look after our waterways, and it's also taken on other aspects in form of ceremony. It sits very safely, but it's not collecting dust.
Yeah. So I guess I want to know did you go in a big loop, or did you get from one end and then call someone to pick you up and drive you back? I mean, did you walk back home?
Yeah. So what I did is I sort of looped around, and then so I went up the East Coast, over the top of the East Coast, down the Bay of Plenty. Then I got to a place called Whakatane. Then I walked into Rotorua. From Rotorua, then I went up to Hamilton. I crossed over to Karangahaki Gorge. And then I was guided to say that I was going to walk the rivers, which I didn't realize I was going to do at that time until I reached there. Then I began to walk the Waikato from Port Waikato above Auckland all the way to Lake Taupo, over the top to Tongariro, Mount Tongariro, which is where the Waikato River starts, and the Whanganui both start from there. And in fact, 8 rivers start from that mountain, and the 4 largest in the North Island, which is why that was the heart that I had to go to. And I camped there for a couple of nights. Then I walked all the way down the Whanganui to the beach, around, and then I injured myself. And there's a story to that. But so I was laid off for 2 weeks. I had to stay put off. I wasn't able to move. And then I knew that I had to come home, but I wasn't fully able to walk. I had 1,400 kilometers under my clock, and I thought I want to finish the 1,000 miles, the 1,600 kilometers. So I worked out that the last 200 kilometers would be from Napier to Gisborne, and that if I could walk that last stretch, which would bring me home, I would sort of close off the loop. So I began that walk, and I got halfway there, and I injured myself again. And long story short, I wasn't meant to walk the entire distance myself, and that's why I injured my foot. And then I was guided to invite others to walk the final 200 kilometers for me. And so I put the word out over social media, and I asked if people would do a kilometer somewhere, walk a kilometer. And if I could add all those up, then that would be the final 200 kilometers. And essentially the message was, the reason why you've been stopped walking all the way is because it would have become an ego trip for you, where you were more concerned about hitting 1,000 miles than the purpose of the journey. So you have to ask others to walk for you and finish it. And also because since you've been walking, so many people have been following the journey that you don't walk alone, that they have been with you, and they need to conclude their journey as well, that it's not just your own personal experience. It's now the experience of hundreds of others and thousands who have been following the journey. And so for them to be able to do a kilometer would be to activate them physically from something that they've been a passive participant in. And then I realized, there's some great wisdom in what they're saying here. So I needed that humility. Others needed the opportunity to participate. And of course, since we've concluded, so many more people have picked up the challenge and are now walking. And I mean walking in the sense that they're engaging in their community, with their councils, with their waterways, they're visiting, they're seeing. And so I thought, what a perfect way to conclude this journey, I think we had about 500 other people who decided that they would walk a kilometer and add it to the total, which brought me home. So great end.
Yeah, splendid. It's a really nice match to that sort of network dissemination message that came along with it. I mean, it could really only end that way, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah. So does this experience, I'm just interested in you, obviously I'm interested in your PAR project. You went into the PAR project knowing this stuff is real, but if we can be a bit crass about it, you're better at this now. You're better at spirit interaction and so on, because you just put in this enormous, journey, right? Does it change? Are you looking at the PAR project in a different way? Does it change some of the sort of tikanga that you were looking at? Are they going to be different? Is the journey going to be reflected in some way? Or has it changed how you see the PAR project? Does that make sense?
It's enriched it. It's expanded on the meaning of it, the value of it, the role that it has as a portal. I had a small inkling that there was a necessary portal, but I just didn't realize just how significant that is until now. Since then, there's been a large number of visitors that have come and joined and shared in the PAR site experience in a spiritual way. It's teaching me so much. Things that have, I don't know if, what I felt was that there were many ceremonies, there are wisdom that needs to come back, that portals need to be open so that those lessons and teachings can be brought back. That we don't have enough of these portals. They need to be sacred places set apart for that purpose. And not only is this PAR site one, but there are many and others that need to be awoken as well. And so it's a humbling experience just to participate in that. And there's still work that I'm doing on it, but it's the people that come and that are being, I think, blessed by that, including myself, which is the real value that it has. I can't wait just to continue to see its evolution and where it leads us all. It's a wonderful, deeply fulfilling experience to be connecting with my ancestors, with the spirit of the land, with the guardians, and with people. It's priceless, to be honest.
Yeah, splendid stuff. Well, I was rapt. This is a remarkable thing you've done and are doing, Marcus. And it's always good to catch up on it. I have all these questions about what's going on with the Whare Karakia, because that stuff is close to my heart. But unless you have some more time to talk about the Whare Karakia, and can't remember if it was complete last time or not. But
it's let me share this part. So the Whare Karakia, the actual structure is still not complete, but the action of karakia has not stopped. In fact, it's just increasing. The other structures on the pa side itself have opened themselves a lot more.
Because of it? Is this what you were kind of hinting at, which is what I picked up when you were saying you're a lot better at portal sniffing, and there are more that are kind of opening on the pa side? Are you talking specifically about a star portal here? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of real understanding of the star portal theoretically, other than their own personal direct experience and the voice, the council, I guess, which says that this is one of places where there's an opening occurring, and you'll learn more about it as it opens by direct experience. And I don't know if I could have been prepared for it. Maybe I could have. Maybe I have been. But more and more visitors that come also are able to add more awareness and understanding to it. A lot of gifts have come over the last, since I've come home, we've had about 60 people that have found their way here, and most of it is all by what we call the spirit that have been guided here. There's no planning or expectation. People just show up, and then they share their gift and their experience, and then we share ours with them. And I think that's the way it should be. I don't know if it's a booking issue. We can't book that sort of thing. No,
exactly. Well, remarkable stuff as ever. Have you put all the images, or a general rundown of the hikoi anywhere? I'm just thinking as we get to the end of the show, if I want to direct people somewhere, if they'd like to know more or follow up, where is there somewhere there's somewhere they can go and learn more about the hikoi?
Apart from my Facebook, my social media, in particular Facebook and a little bit of Instagram, I actually should put a sort of central area. I took a large number of photos, and a lot of the moments of experience I wanted to capture. I've always felt with the spirits and the ancestors, I says, you know who I am, and you know that I'm going to share this information. So if that's what you want, that's why you choose me. And so I've never hesitated in some of these moments to capture as much as I can. And to share that. It has to be shared in an appropriate manner with respect, but this is a part about coming into all knowledge and being available and having access to it. And also, I've spoken with a lot of my Indigenous friends about protecting the sanctity of our ceremonies by not displaying them. And I says, I understand that principle, but I also understand that if we don't share the knowledge and are the source of that knowledge, then in today's day, there's too much availability of others who can take the videos and the pictures, post it up without the source information to help people respect it. So if we're not engaged in that conversation, then it's our fault. And so social media was the first place, but I'm pulling together some podcasts. I've done a 10-hour recording of the whole journey.
Oh, sweet.
I have no idea how to do podcasting yet, but we'll start with the 10-hour recording, and then we'll work out how to break it up. And then the photos that come with it, there's hundreds and hundreds of photos and videos, so maybe a book or some sort of website as well.
Nice. Well, if you wouldn't mind picking maybe 4 or 5 of them when the show goes out, we can stick them on the show page and kind of give people a taste of it.
That'd be great. I'd welcome that.
Nice one. All right. Well, always a pleasure talking. As this has just been fantastic, and congratulations, and in a way, commiserations. You've found a destiny, and it's an amazing one, but it's also a lot of work.
It sure is. But
yeah. So it's wonderful speaking to you, Marcus.
It's been great to talk with you as always, and appreciate everything that you do, and pray a blessing upon all your work and all those who listen, and may we continue to share this good good news and the good work that you're doing.
Really fascinating stuff there, as always. For some of our ongoing discussions among the premium members, it's good to see the more than human world expressing or solidifying inside more typically Western modes of understanding. Marcus and I are going to stay in touch regarding the recordings and the website and so on, so keep your eyes on the blog for updates in the months to come. Speaking of recordings and keeping your eyes on things, be sure to subscribe to the show in your favourite podcatcher or on YouTube. Let me know what you think at runesoup.com or the Runesoup Facebook page. And find me on Twitter, where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.